Before sunrise in Burkina Faso, a farmer stands beside a harvest that will soon begin a much longer journey. Cotton, sesame, mangoes, and other crops leave communities like his every year, carried by trucks toward buyers far beyond the fields where they were grown. For generations, the question seemed simple: who overseas will buy what Burkina Faso produces? But today, another question deserves attention. What if one of Burkina Faso's greatest future markets is not across an ocean at all? What if it is Africa itself, a continent of roughly 1.5 billion people? If Africa's economic future matters to you, tell us where you are watching from, because this story is about far more than trade. A successful harvest can put money into a farmer's hands, but that is only the first step in a product's economic life. After the crop leaves the farm, someone may clean it, someone may process it, someone packages it, stores it, transports it, finances it, markets it, and finally sells it to a consumer. At every step, new value can be created, new businesses can emerge, new workers can earn an income. So the real question is not simply how much Burkina Faso can grow. It is how much economic activity can be built around what the country already produces. And that changes the meaning of Africa's enormous consumer market. This is not a story about abandoning Europe, America, or the rest of the world. It is about creating more choices closer to home. Because when we follow just one Burkina Faso product from a farmer's hands to the final customer, something becomes difficult to ignore. What leaves the country may not be only a crop. Opportunity can travel with it. And to understand how much opportunity is at stake, we need to follow the money. Take something small enough to hold in one hand, a bag of sesame seeds. At first glance, it does not look like the beginning of an economic transformation. It looks ordinary. It looks simple. But the moment those seeds leave the farm, their story can change completely. A farmer may sell the raw harvest and receive one payment. That matters. But what happens after that sale matters too. The sesame may be cleaned, it may be sorted, it may be processed into cooking oil or other food products. It may be bottled, packaged, stored, transported, financed, distributed, and finally placed on a store shelf. At every stage, someone adds labor, someone owns equipment, someone operates a warehouse, someone drives a truck, someone manages inventory, someone designs packaging, someone lends money, someone sells the finished product. One crop can support far more than one transaction, and that is where the story of Burkina Faso becomes more interesting. Imagine a farming family that has grown sesame for years. The older generation knows the risks of the land: uncertain weather, changing prices, difficult transport, and the pressure to sell quickly after harvest. Their children may look at the same crop and see something different. They may see a processing business, a transport company, a packaging workshop, a small food brand, an engineering job, a logistics platform. One generation grows the harvest. The next generation wants to build what comes after it. That is the difference between producing a commodity and building an economy around a commodity. And the same question can be asked again and again. What happens to cotton after it leaves the field? What happens to mangoes after they are picked? What happens to livestock after it leaves the farm? In every case, there is a chain of value between the original producer and the final consumer. The longer that chain becomes, the more opportunities can exist for workers, businesses, technicians, transporters, and investors. But there is also a danger in making this story sound easier than it is. Processing does not create prosperity automatically. A factory needs reliable electricity. Equipment needs maintenance. Businesses need financing. Products must meet quality standards. Roads must be usable. Borders must function. Customers must actually want what companies are producing. If one part of the chain fails, the entire system can slow down. That is why economic transformation is not simply a matter of building a factory and declaring success. It is about connecting many pieces that must work together. Still, the potential is easy to understand when we return to that bag of sesame. If it leaves the country as raw material, much of the value created later may happen somewhere else. But if more of those steps take place closer to home, then more workers, businesses, and communities may participate before the final product reaches a customer. And that customer does not always need to be thousands of miles away. A growing regional market can create another path. This is where the title of this story begins to make sense. Africa's population is not just a number. It represents demand. It represents households, shops, restaurants, factories, and businesses that buy things every day. If Burkina Faso can produce more finished goods for those markets, the question changes from who will buy our raw materials to how much value can we create before the sale is complete. And sesame is only the first example, because once you apply the same logic to cotton, mangoes, and other products, agriculture begins to look less like the end of the story and more like the beginning of industry. That is where the next part of Burkina Faso's economic future becomes much more ambitious. Now take cotton. At first, it seems like another agricultural product, something grown in fields, harvested, packed, and sold. But ask a different question. What happens between cotton and the shirt? That space between the raw crop and the finished product is where an entire industrial story can begin. Cotton can be cleaned, spun, woven, dyed, cut, sewn, packaged, transported, and sold. Each step requires different skills, different equipment, and different businesses. A farmer grows the crop, but a technician keeps machines running. A driver moves materials. A warehouse worker manages inventory. A textile worker turns fiber into fabric. A small manufacturer turns fabric into uniforms, work clothes, or consumer products. A retailer connects those products to customers. Suddenly, agriculture is no longer only about what happens in a field. It becomes connected to manufacturing, transport, finance, design, maintenance, and trade. That is why the question facing Burkina Faso is not only how much cotton it can produce. It is how much of the value chain can realistically take place closer to where that cotton is grown. The same logic becomes even clearer with mangoes, because mangoes come with a clock. Once fruit is harvested, time begins working against the producer. Fresh mangoes must move quickly. Delays can reduce quality. Poor storage can destroy value. A weak transport system can turn a good harvest into a bad business outcome, but processing changes the equation. Mangoes can be dried, turned into juice, preserved, packaged, stored, and distributed in forms that may travel farther and last longer. That creates opportunities beyond the farm itself. Processing facilities need operators. Cold storage needs technicians. Packaging requires materials and suppliers. Transport companies need drivers and maintenance. Banks and investors may finance equipment. Digital payment systems help businesses move money. Universities and training centers prepare workers for new technical roles. One crop begins to connect many parts of the economy. This is the bigger idea behind value addition. Burkina Faso does not necessarily need to discover an entirely new resource before it can build new industries. It can ask what industries may already be hidden inside the resources it produces today. That question matters especially for young people. An older generation may look at a harvest and ask whether the rains were good, whether prices will hold, and whether the crop can reach a buyer. A younger generation may look at the same harvest and ask a different question. What business can we build around this? Can we process it? Can we package it? Can we sell it to nearby markets? Can we design technology that reduces waste or improves transport? Can we create a company that solves one weak link in the chain? That change in perspective is important because it transforms agriculture from a symbol of survival uh, into a platform for industry. But once again, ambition alone is not enough. A factory without electricity struggles. A good product without reliable transport loses competitiveness. A processing business without financing cannot expand. A company without quality standards cannot reach serious buyers. This is why economic transformation depends on systems, not slogans. The farm, the factory, the bank, the warehouse, the road, and the customer all have to connect. And that brings us to the next challenge. Building the product is only half the journey. Burkina Faso is landlocked. No matter how good the factory becomes, every finished product still has to move. It has to cross roads, warehouses, checkpoints, and borders. So the next question is no longer about what Burkina Faso can produce. It is about whether geography can become an obstacle or an advantage. How do you turn a landlocked country into a gateway to hundreds of millions of potential customers? A finished product is only valuable if it can reach a customer. That sounds obvious, but for Burkina Faso, geography makes the question far more serious. The country is landlocked. There is no direct seaport waiting at the edge of its industrial zones. Every truck carrying food, textiles, or other goods must depend on roads, warehouses, border crossings, custom systems, and transport corridors that connect Burkina Faso to neighboring markets. Imagine one truck leaving a processing facility outside Ouagadougou. It is carrying packaged food produced from crops grown inside the country. Its destination is not London, Paris, or New York. Its customer is somewhere else in Africa. That should make the journey shorter. But shorter does not always mean simpler. Every delay adds cost. Every checkpoint adds uncertainty. Every border procedure can slow delivery. For manufactured goods, that can weaken competitiveness. For food, time can become even more important. A delay at a border is not just paperwork. It can mean higher fuel costs, missed deliveries, spoiled products, cancelled orders, and smaller profits for everyone connected to the shipment. This is where regional integration stops being an abstract policy idea and becomes something a truck driver can feel in real time. The driver does not measure economic integration through speeches. He measures it through hours. How long does he wait? How many forms must be completed? How predictable is the route? Can the truck return on schedule? Can the business promise a customer that the next shipment will arrive when expected? These details may sound small, but they determine whether a regional market works in practice. And this is also where the promise of a large African consumer base meets reality. A continent of roughly 5 billion people is not the same thing as one perfectly connected marketplace. Countries have different regulations. Purchasing power varies. Infrastructure is uneven. Businesses face local competitors. Security conditions can affect transport. Customs procedures can still create friction. A factory in Burkina Faso may be able to produce a good product, but that does not guarantee the product can move cheaply, quickly, or consistently enough to win customers in another country. This is the test separate economic ambition from economic execution. Roads matter, warehouses matter, reliable border systems matter, trade corridors matter, and cooperation between governments and businesses matters. When those pieces improve, the economic distance between two countries can become much smaller than the physical distance suggests. A neighboring market may become easier to serve. Transport costs may become more predictable. Businesses may be willing to invest because they can see a realistic path from factory to customer. But if the system remains slow or unreliable, even a strong producer can lose its advantage. That is why the border may matter more than the factory. A factory creates the product. The border determines whether the product can become part of a larger market. And if those regional links strengthen over time, the benefits could spread beyond one company or one shipment. Farmers gain more potential buyers. Processors gain more demand. Trucking companies gain more business. Warehouses become more valuable. Retailers gain more products. Consumers gain more choices. But there is still one question left. Even if the product moves successfully across the border and reaches the customer, what happens after the sale? Where does the money go? Who keeps the value? Who reinvests it? And how many times can that money circulate through African businesses before it leaves the region? That is where the story becomes much bigger than transportation. Now return to the sesame product we followed earlier. Imagine that it has been processed, packaged, transported across a regional corridor, and placed on a store shelf somewhere in Africa. A customer buys it. The transaction takes only a few seconds, but economically, that sale can connect an entire chain of people. Part of the payment goes to the retailer, part supports the distributor, part helps cover transportation. Part returns to the professor. Workers receive wages, suppliers are paid, equipment is maintained, packaging is replaced, farmers receive demand for another harvest. In other words, the money does not simply disappear after one purchase. It can move through several businesses before the cycle begins again. This is where the idea of a continental consumer market becomes more important than the headline number itself. Africa's roughly 1.5 billion people are not meaningful simply because the number is large. They matter because consumers create demand, and demand gives businesses a reason to invest. If a processor knows there are reliable customers for cooking oil, dried fruit, textiles, or other finished goods, that company has a stronger reason to expand production. Expansion may require new machinery. New machinery requires financing and technicians. More production requires more workers. More workers earn income. Those workers become consumers themselves. That is how an economic flywheel can begin. Demand supports investment. Investment creates capacity. Capacity creates jobs. Jobs create income. Income creates more demand. But this is also where optimism must be tested. A population of 1.5 billion does not mean every consumer can buy every product. Purchasing power differs sharply across countries and communities. Local companies face competition from established domestic and international brands. Energy costs matter, financing costs matter, security matters, infrastructure matters. A product that succeeds in one market may fail in another. And regional integration only creates opportunity if businesses can actually compete on price, quality, reliability, and trust. So the question is not whether Africa has enough people. It clearly does. The real question is whether producers can build strong enough systems to serve those people consistently. If they can, the consequences could extend far beyond individual companies. A processor that grows may buy more crops. A transport company may add trucks. A warehouse may expand. A bank may finance another business. A retailer may carry more locally or regionally produced goods. None of these steps transforms an economy by itself, but together they create something more powerful than a single export contract, a network, and networks create resilience. A country with more buyers has more options. A business with several markets is less dependent on one customer. A farmer with more demand has greater bargaining room than a farmer with only one outlet. That is why the story of 1.5 billion consumers is ultimately not about replacing one market with another. It is about expanding choice. And once a country gains more economic choices, something else begins to change. Its relationships with outside partners can change too, because the ability to say yes becomes more valuable when a country also has the ability to say no. That is where a story about sesame, cotton, mangoes, truck, and shops suddenly becomes geopolitical. This is where the story stops being only about agriculture and trade. It becomes a story about choice. A country that depends heavily on a narrow group of buyers has fewer options when prices fall, policies change, or political pressure increases. But a country with more customers, more processing capacity, and stronger regional commercial ties may gain something difficult to measure on a balance sheet. room to negotiate. That is why the broader economic message associated with Ibrahim Traore's Burkina Faso attracts so much attention. The deeper question is not whether Burkina Faso should turn away from Europe, America, Asia, or any other region. It is whether a country can build stronger partnerships when it has more than one path available, if farmers have more buyers, if businesses can reach more African markets, and if more value is created before products leave the region. Burkina Faso could strengthen its economic options over time. And options matter because dependence and partnership are not the same thing. A partnership is strongest when both sides have alternatives. That is also why the rest of the world has reason to pay attention. A more commercially connected Africa could influence investment patterns, supply chains, manufacturing decisions, and the terms under which foreign companies compete for access to African markets. It would not mean the end of global trade. It could mean something more subtle and more important: diversification. Africa trading more with Africa while still trading with the rest of the world. And now we return to the farmer we met at the beginning. He is still standing beside the same harvest. The soil has not changed. The crop has not changed. But the question has. At the start, we asked who would buy what he grows. Now the question is how much can be built around what he grows before the value travels elsewhere. Maybe part of Burkina Faso's economic future is already visible in its fields, its roads, its workshops, its young entrepreneurs, and the markets waiting across African borders. So what happens when Africa becomes a much bigger customer for Burkina Faso? Perhaps the answer is not simply more trade. Perhaps it is more choice. And in economics, as in history, people with more choices usually have more room to shape their future. If you had to choose one priority for Burkina Faso, which should come first? Factories, roads, energy, regional trade, or education? Tell us why, because the answer may reveal more about Africa's future than any single political speech ever could.